Hey, on a quick note, got to share this with you, if I could, just for a moment in this half hour, and then I'm going to move on to something else. But Eric Erickson, who has a talk show in Atlanta, sometimes fills in for Rush Limbaugh. He also has a website he calls The Resurgent, and he says today that there may be a deal between Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio in the works already. He says the rumor is that Cruz will stay out of Rubio's way in Florida and might even suggest people support Rubio in Florida. Everywhere else, Rubio will stay out of Cruz's way, and then Wednesday after the Florida primary, Rubio will join Ted Cruz as a unity ticket. Now, there's a lot of talk that Hillary Clinton already has decided on a candidate who's a Latino to be her vice presidential running mate. So if you had a Cruz-Rubio ticket, the idea is you counter that to some degree, but keep in mind the Latino vote is not a monolith. Some people say the black vote is, but the black vote the other day, the black vote in Michigan went to Sanders. The black vote in the South went to Clinton. So, all of these people who talk about if you're a certain background, you've got to vote a particular way, hogwash. It's 9:35. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 47. Want to thank Cliff Katona for dropping by today and spending some time with us. We are going to have Sheriff Carter join us in the next couple of weeks. And we'll have the other side on this. And in fact, we're still working on a potential radio debate between the two candidates, which would be really more of allowing the two of them just to chat with each other. I think that's what we don't see in a lot of these televised debates on that we've been watching on TV. They're more forums, but the idea that candidates could just sit and talk with each other, I think, it's a breath of fresh air. I mean, in this day and age, without having all of us in the middle. I've got to remind you, the weather today is going to be a little bit unsettled. We're in that time of year in March where we start seeing weather bounce all over the map because you've got spring fighting with winter and the like, and yet that means we're going to have a lot. It'll just one of these days we'll wake up, it'll be 85 degrees, and it'll stay that way every day. Then we'll march from winter directly into summer. So we've been telling you about the need for sunrooms. If you really would like to enjoy the weather, but on some of those really windy days, when you're worried about getting sandblasted if you're out on the deck, well, a sunroom helps you protect yourself. So we've been telling you to get in touch with the folks at Dream Room Design, which you can do by going online at dreamroomdesign.com. Bill Conant, the owner, he's been doing this, well, since the end of the last century. He's been in business a long time. And they'll customize your sunroom. You can have even a glass roof, or you can have a regular roof with just glass walls. You can actually enclose your deck or your patio. I mean, there's a number of things that you can do. And if you would go to the website, you can actually check out many of the videos there and just different designs they've done for other folks, as well as getting some people's reactions. The customer is very satisfied. Will tell you about their own personal sunrooms and what a great job they did at Dream Room Design. So again, we recommend you go to dreamroomdesign.com and check that out. I got a couple of things to tell you quickly about refugee issues around the world, since it has been a huge topic on the local level. First of all, this is a story out of Sweden. Daily Caller reporting this. Swedish police tell women not to go out alone due to migrant violence. Now, this only happens when you have, I think, a certain number of people in a community, and a handful of people that come to your community of another culture tend to stick to themselves, and eventually they will integrate. We're seeing that. I was just reading a few weeks ago, a new study says that in Latino culture, after 2 generations, a lot of Latino immigrants to this country, their children and grandchildren especially no longer identify as Latino. That's a fascinating study that's just been done reporting that. But if you have large swaths of people coming through, then there is no need or no pressure to assimilate. And because of what's happened in Europe over the course of the past several months, we're seeing some serious clashes between cultures. Police in a Swedish city have sparked an uproar after warning women to avoid going outside alone in the wake of a string of assaults allegedly committed by migrants. Östersund is a small city of about 40,000 located in northern Sweden. So what? You know about the size of Twin Falls, right? That historically has had to worry very little about crime. In the weeks since February 20th, so we're only looking back a couple of weeks, the city has seen 9 different attacks on women, all of them allegedly committed by non-Swedish men. In one case, 3 men attempted to tackle and rape a woman in the town square. And in another incident, a group of men made a groping attack on a group of 10-year-old girls waiting for their school bus. Finally, on Monday, the city's police took the drastic step of recommending that women simply stop going out alone at night in order to protect themselves. What's next? Is the local police department going to recommend that they start putting on tents, burqas, and walking around in the streets that way so that they don't anger the migrants? When do you tell the migrants, hey, you're no longer in La La Land. You're in civilized country now, and you're going to behave as such. But again, Europe, filled with liberals, the panty waist have no intention of actually saying that because, gee golly gosh, it might offend people. Tell you what, I just picked up the telephone and realized we're going to break. Caller, my apologies. If you'd like to sit through the break, that's fine. Otherwise, you can call me back directly after the break. I'll take some of your comments on this as well, coming up in just a few minutes. 20 minutes away from 10 o'clock. It's 48. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. So we were talking in the last segment about problems in another European city because migrants, meaning refugees in the parlance of the left, can't control their urges when it comes to Western women. Oh, I know people are going to say, well, that's a nasty thing to say. That's bigoted and that's prejudiced. All right, well, then why don't they behave themselves? And why are there so many stories of this coming out? Because they look at the women of Europe who are not Muslim and they think that they are inferior. They believe we are the subhuman types. That's why we're dealing with this. Abraham Miller, writing at the Washington Times today, Syria refugees likely end up on welfare. Here's another thing he's talking about. He's writing about his hometown of Walnut Creek, California, which is called a preferred community. In other words, it's one of those places to dump these people. And then he says neighboring communities outside of Walnut, similar small towns, are called seed communities. And he said, beyond the impact on local welfare, educational, medical, and housing resources, a grave concern is security. These are exacerbated because neither the federal government nor the Volags, those are the groups bringing them here, which they get a great deal of money for this, and the subcontractors will reveal the number of refugees they tend to unleash on local taxpayers. The myth of refugee resettlement is that the federal government pays for the refugees. Well, that means you, the taxpayers. Those payments only exist for 6 months at most, and then the Volags and their subcontractors show the refugees the way to the local welfare office. According to the Center for Immigration Studies, 49% of refugees end up using one or more welfare programs. In other words, half. But hey, again, it's your money. Who cares? By golly, it's our reparations for being an empire and colonialists and because, well, it's reparations for the Crusades. I was not involved in the Crusades. I was doing my homework that night. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com.
Yeah. You were told that it wasn't polite for you to talk about Hillary in a rude way. Well, as for being a Christian and politeness, Christ called the Pharisees hypocrites. How do you be polite with that? Or beating the money changers with a whip? What did you hit him and said, have a nice day? I mean, come on.
Yeah, he got their attention, didn't he?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just can't be polite sometimes.
Well, I thank you very much for the telephone call. But, I also remind people, too, this is a commercial radio program. You have public radio, which is socialist radio. That is, it's funded by you, the taxpayers. And then they have their own particular slant. Even if you're not a leftist, Marxist, Leninist, you're paying for that over there at public radio. And then you've got designated Christian radio stations, and some, not all Christians, you've got Jewish radio stations and the like that are fairly common in this country, too. In fact, I have some friends who run a radio station right here in town, a Catholic radio station. But those are all different animals. Public radio is for leftist personages, to put it mildly. And then you have Christian radio, and that is addressing a certain audience. And they have their own designations from the FCC. And I'm on commercial radio. Now, I go to church, but I'm probably not quite as devout as some people and maybe a little bit more devout than others. I just happen to be somebody who does that, but also I host a political show on a commercial radio station. 947, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And the fact that I don't like Hillary Clinton, so what? Apparently, a lot of other people don't as well, even in the Democrat Party, especially in Michigan, where she lost. But even though she lost the other day, the handlers in her so-called Democrat Party, who aren't very democratic, turned around and gave her more delegates, despite the fact that she lost. Figure that one out. And yet, her enablers in media say, well, yeah, but... No buts about it. And by the way, she apparently committed some crimes. Yeah, but... In other words, the ends justify the means. We don't care that she's a shameless criminal. By golly, she's going to write more checks and provide more money for Democrats and rob from the rest of you. That's all they care about. These are not immoral people. If they were, they would not be Democrats. Can we make that any clearer? 949, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Speaking of religious faith, caller led me right into this. The ACLU's Hypocrisy on Religious Liberty. That's the title of a story today in the Daily Signal. Tori McClintock, the writer, along with Melanie Wood. Apparently the ACLU over the years has been fighting. For instance, if a guy who is of the Sikh faith, those are not Muslims, they're not Hindus. They were known in the World War II as the Gurkhas. They fought on the side of the Allies, and they were great troops. They were paratroopers, brave men. And we have a number of them who've settled in this country over the last, 30 years. But apparently their religion forbids them from removing that turban when they're in public, and they have to grow a beard. The U.S. Army wanted to prohibit that, and the Army said, no, we have a uniform means uniform. Everyone's the same. So you shave and you take off the turban. Well, when somebody who was a Sikh decided to challenge the U.S. Army, the ACLU jumped in and said, religious liberty, religious liberty, religious liberty. And they defended the guy. But on the other hand, when it comes to Christians who are right now fighting against the establishment, a government saying, well, you have to bake that cake. If you don't, you're going to go to jail and we're going to take all of your money. That's what happens. And the ACLU says, well, it's just Christians. Who cares? And the ACLU is not what you'd call a very, friendly organization to Christians around the country. The ACLU says, well, we have to ensure the rights of Johnny and Jimmy, and you weren't nice to them. The fact of the matter is, rights are about what government cannot do to you. These public accommodation laws, I brought this up on the air before. The Constitution says the government cannot discriminate. But what does the word discriminate mean? Well, if you walk into a restaurant and you decide you're going to have the finest pie instead of the sort of common pie, you have discriminated. We all discriminate every day. But if I don't like someone, so what? It may not be nice, but it's not illegal. And yet the ACLU jumps in and says, nope, if you're a Christian and you deny to take a picture of Johnny and Jimmy with their tongues in each other's mouth, how dare you? You must go to jail. You must give up your business, and we're going to fine you, and we're going to ensure that you're in bankruptcy the rest of your life. But a guy who shows up with a turban and the beard and says, I want to look different than everyone else here in the Army, they'll jump on board and say, well, we've got to defend that guy. 951, Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It gets worse for people, much worse, for people with traditional Christian values. The very same publication, the Daily Signal, says big business has sided with the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender activists against Georgia's religious liberty bill. Leah Jessen, the reporter, major corporations, including Google and Twitter, run by, of course, flaming liberals, are coalescing in opposition to legislation in Georgia that would protect the right of individuals and institutions to practice their religion. Part of the state legislation prevents clergy from being required to perform same-sex marriages if doing so violates their religious beliefs. In other words, a pastor at a very traditional Christian congregation could be forced, if Georgia does not pass this law to protect them, could be forced. That's the next step. Well, Johnny and Jimmy want to get married in your church. Tell them to go down to the Presbyterian Church USA. They'll do the wedding. No, they want to be married in your church. Johnny says that when he was 12, he was a member of your Pentecostal faith, and he will not be satisfied until he's married in your church. Yes, but if Johnny was a member of our church, Johnny knows that we do not sanction his marriage. That doesn't matter. You can't hurt Johnny's feelings. So, Reverend, you're going to have to do it. Yes, but there's 10 other reverends in town who'll do it because their churches are the church of the brunch. They don't care any longer. They've thrown the Bible out. They're all social clubs. That doesn't matter. Johnny and Jimmy, as I told you, they want to be married in your church, and you'll do it or you'll go to jail. And yet you've got Google and Twitter saying, fine, send him to jail. And you've got all of these big companies jumping on board. More than 400 businesses in Georgia have joined a coalition called Georgia Prospers to fight what advocates call a religious liberty bill protecting First Amendment rights and what opponents characterize as an attempt to legalize discrimination against same-sex couples. Again, the government cannot discriminate. The Constitution and its Bill of Rights were set up to say these are the things the government cannot do to you, not what these are the things government can do to you. So the government cannot discriminate. The government cannot put up in its offices 2 drinking fountains with a sign that says colored and white. The government is prohibited from doing that. But if you're a pastor, you are not the U.S. government. In fact, they always scream, separation of church and state, separation of church and state, which is not anywhere found in the Constitution. You will not find that phrase in any of our founding documents. It's not in the Federalist Papers. It's not in the Declaration of Independence. It's not in the Constitution. So here you go. You've got people who are saying that, you know what? We're going to force everyone else to act just like the government. And the government gets its way. 9:53. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Chinese Christians persecuted by communist regime forced to destroy church crosses or face punishment. So we are becoming more and more like China. This story out of the Christian Post. Chinese Christians across several congregations are facing the choice of voluntarily dismantling the crosses on their own churches or seeing government officials come in and forcibly demolish them, reports have said. China Aid reported that the number of church crosses demolished in Zhejiang since the beginning of 2016 has risen to 49, as the Communist Party continues to send soldiers to churches across several provinces to take down their crosses. The government argues is due to building code violations. So how are we any different now than the communist Chinese who are telling people, you know what, you can't have that cross up there. It's a violation of our building codes. And if you don't take it down, we'll come in and strong-arm you and we'll knock it down. They don't want anybody to have a Christian faith that rivals the power of the government. And a symbol as simple as the cross does that. You understand that, right? This is what people are dealing with in other parts of the world, and we are now starting to see that happen here in the good old USA, land of the free, home of the brave. And all of the lefties out there are just it just warms them to no end. They're rubbing themselves right now as we speak over the notion that they too can have their own Politburo and do to you whatever they feel they can do, whatever pleases them at the moment. 9:56, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Coming up next week on the show, because we're running out of time for this week, coming up next week on the show, do want to point out, as we do every Wednesday between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine, right here in studio with us. This is also your opportunity to telephone and ask a question of one of our medical professionals. You don't necessarily have to direct it immediately to the topic du jour. You can actually, if you've got an immediate problem and you want someone to address it on the telephone, they're more than willing to do that. We should point out Tripp Family Medicine is still accepting new patients. The office is located on Fillmore Street, directly across from the main post office in Twin Falls. And the great thing about this office, they're not told they can only spend 7 minutes with you at a time. They can spend as much time as they need with each patient. And often, if you have a serious need to see a doctor or a physician assistant right away, they can get you into the office sometimes that afternoon or the following day. Doesn't happen very many other places. And again, remember, life's too short not to feel good. On a much lighter note today, I've got to close the week out this way. God willing and the creek don't rise, first of all. I'll be back here on Monday morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. Even though I did tell you that Satan was setting up in the storefront across the street today. Well, not here on Park Avenue, but, you know. Now that he knows where we are, we're always in trouble. Let me put it that way. But I do hope that you can join me again on Monday morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. Rush Limbaugh today, following my program, following the 10 o'clock news on Fox. Glenn Beck, of course, coming up at 4 o'clock this afternoon and sandwiched in between Sean Hannity. And on a sad note today, the most interesting man in the world is being retired. A commercial aired last night during a basketball game. The most interesting man is on his way to being the most interesting man on Mars.
His only regret is not knowing what regret feels like. He is the most interesting man in the world.
His trip to Mars is only one way.
Adios, amigo.
Stay thirsty, my friend.
The end of an era in American television. Sadly to say, the most interesting man in the world has blasted off to Mars on a one-way trip. 9:58, coming up on news at 10 o'clock. Hey, have a great weekend, everyone.